If it's Tuesday, House Republicans ramp up their investigations into the president as the White House confirms the discovery of classified documents found at a private office used by President Biden soon after he left the Obama administration. Plus, the president is set to speak later this hour as he wraps up a summit with the leaders of Mexico and Canada on a wide range of diplomatic challenges, including the migrant crisis, trade policies, and crime. And the death toll climbs in California as severe weather slams the state with heavy rain, widespread power outages, and flood warnings for more than 30 million residents. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where right now the new Republican-controlled House is ramping up its investigations into the Biden administration. In just a few moments, we expect the chamber to vote on establishing a select committee to probe what Republicans are calling the weaponization of the federal government. Now, the vote comes as the White House is facing new scrutiny after confirming that the Justice Department is reviewing the discovery of a small number of documents with classified markings found at an office used by Mr. Biden after his time as vice president. Two sources familiar with the matter tell NBC News that fewer than a dozen documents with classified markings were found. Now, according to the special counsel to the president, the documents were found by the president's private attorneys in a locked closet days before the midterm elections. Right now, there is a lot we do not know yet about the documents themselves and the White House's handling of the matter. But Republicans on Capitol Hill have seized on the revelation, some using it to accuse the FBI of a double standard after its search of Mar-a-Lago, where former President Trump was improperly storing hundreds of classified documents and highly secret documents.
Look, this just goes along with the narrative that a lot of people in America believe there's a two-tier system of justice at the Department of Justice. They believe that Donald Trump was treated differently than any other president. And I'm not accusing Joe Biden of wrongdoing. I think he probably made a simple mistake. You could say the same thing about Donald Trump.
NBC News has learned from a source familiar with the matter that Attorney General Merrick Garland has asked a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney to look into how those documents ended up at one of Mr. Biden's private offices. President Biden did not answer a shouted question earlier today or yesterday in Mexico about whether he'd mishandled classified material. But in a statement last night, his special counsel said the White House counsel's office notified the National Archives the day the documents were discovered in early November, and that the White House is cooperating with the National Archives and the Justice Department. Now, the circumstances surrounding former President Trump's mishandling of classified information are very different from what we know about the current president's situation, but still, there is concern on both sides of the aisle. The Democratic head of the Senate Intelligence Committee is calling for a briefing from White House officials, and the new Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee is calling for the Director of National Intelligence to conduct a damage assessment. President Biden's lawyers say they turned over the documents as soon as they were discovered, but Republicans are asking why the White House waited to disclose that information publicly.
One thing that we don't like is that those classified documents were known before the election and was intentionally concealed to the Americans. I think that's wrong. You can't, concealing this information was not right. It looks political. And when national organizations are aware of this and they hold it before an election, it looks political.
Joining me now is our team of reporters. They've been working their sources throughout the night. Mike Memoli is in Mexico City covering the president's trip. Ali Vitale is on Capitol Hill. And in a moment, I'll be joined by NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. And Mike Memoli, I have to start with you. You have been out front on this reporting. What more do we know about these documents? How many were there and where this all goes from here?
Well, Kristen, really our understanding of these documents is shaped for the most part by a statement that was released by the White House last night, which presents these circumstances in very broad strokes. That there is this private office that then former Vice President Joe Biden was using right on Constitution Avenue near the Capitol as part of his post-vice presidency, and that this office really hadn't been used for the better part of the last 4 years. As you know, Kristen, the office President Biden uses primarily at this point is oval-shaped about a few miles miles down the road from that building now. And so his staff was packing up that office for good, essentially. And in the process of packing up that office, they discovered these documents with classified markings. At this point, that's really all we know. They notified the National Archives immediately, the White House counsel's office, which then began this process that has led to the appointment of the U.S. attorney from Illinois to oversee this review. Among the questions that we're asking is, now, one of them, how many documents? We're reporting it's less than a dozen. What are the classification levels and markings of these documents? That's critical because the higher the classification level, the more potential legal jeopardy is involved on those Biden associates who might have handled those documents. And I think a key question that I've been asking is, are these documents that the vice president, his staff, took with him from the White House, or whether these documents were things that he might have requested or have needed to access after he left the White House with a security clearance. Based on my understanding of why and how this office operated, he didn't really move into it until late 2017, which is months after he left the White House. So were these boxes that were transported a number of different places? And that would, if so, would then beg the question of whether there are other boxes with potentially other documents scattered out in the different areas where Biden has kept homes over these last few years.
Mike, before I go to Ali Vitale on Capitol Hill, let me just ask you, because you map out, I think, all of the different threads that we are trying to get answers to. And one of the other big ones is, why didn't the White House disclose this sooner? Basically, they responded when a news organization broke this news. So what are they saying about that, Mike?
Yeah, it's interesting, Kristen, because I think you heard from Chairman Comer now, who wields a gavel and subpoena power along with it, a very important question. Why weren't they more forthcoming with these details sooner? What we learned from a statement from Ian Sams, who's a spokesperson for the counsel's office at the White House, is that essentially they're saying because this is a Justice Department review that's ongoing, they are limited in what they're being able to say. So they're essentially casting their lack of transparency at this point as doing their legal due diligence to avoid disrupting review. I'm not sure, Kristen, that position is going to be tenable in the long run, in part because, as you know, we're going to hear from President Biden potentially in about an hour. He's going to be holding a news conference with the other two leaders here, the Prime Minister of Canada, the President of Mexico, in which we know he's going to be taking at least one question from a U.S. outlet. Presumably this question is on top of mind. And will the president potentially give any further intel beyond what his office, what the White House has said? That's going to be obviously something we're watching closely.
Yeah, Mike, obviously you, Monica Alba there in Mexico City, will be on top of that. If he does respond at that press conference, we'll be listening very closely. Ali Vitale, let me go to you on Capitol Hill, because rewind 48 hours ago, and we already knew that Republicans were poised to open investigations into the Biden administration on a range of different topics. This is yet another one, and it's really being viewed as a bit of a political gift, not only to former President Trump, right, who's weighed in already, but to Republicans on Capitol Hill. What are you hearing there?
Yeah, certainly Trump making himself known on this story, but he's not in the conversation here on the Hill. For Republicans, as they took the gavel, not just overall, but at each of these separate committees, investigations were always going to be a central feature of the fact that they now have the majority, that they now have the subpoena power that goes along with it. You're right, I think, to look at this as a political gift of sorts, because certainly that's the way that it's being received. It allows Republicans to really sink their teeth in these early days of having the majority and look as if they are not just investigating in an outright political fashion. We already knew that they were going to be looking into how the DOJ handled the Mar-a-Lago case, but what it does is it allows them to really muddy the waters here. And what we're seeing from Republicans is certainly a range of reactions that range from impeach Biden, that's Marjorie Taylor Greene already using that phrase, to the more sober-minded saying that they want to investigate this. I would note, though, by and large, this is coming from House Republicans, but over in the Senate, Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Intel Committee, saying that he wants a briefing on this just because he needs a sense of what's going on. It's the same thing that he asked for in the aftermath of the Mar-a-Lago documents becoming public, and he never got that briefing, in part because of potential scheduling problems with other members on the committee, but it's still something he wants. Now, he's asking for the same thing while making note of the fact that in this case with Biden, it sounds like these were documents documents that were found and quickly turned over, whereas in the case of the former President Donald Trump, it was a question of having to continuously go back to his orbit and ultimately have the feds go down there and find these documents himself. Nevertheless, you don't know what you don't know, and that's why these lawmakers are saying they want a briefing on this. But make no bones about it, Kristen, Republicans are seeing this as a real gift to them as they kick off the majority.
Ali, I'm glad you end on that point, because very quick follow-up to you. You do have some Republicans who are acknowledging the points that you just laid out, that these are two very different circumstances. Comer, for example, but they're really seizing on the idea. So is there this double standard with the Justice Department? Is that your sense? Is that where this argument is going on the Hill?
Definitely. And look, they were going to make this argument regardless. They were going to say that this is not the way that the former president should be treated, that DOJ was weaponized. Look, they're about to, in the next minute or so, as I see people behind me go into the floor, vote to create this committee on what they're calling weaponization of the government. It's going to look into things like what happened around the Mar-a-Lago documents case, among other things, right? This is going to be one of the key tools for this coming Congress for Republicans to really air their grievances over the course of the last few years on any number of issues. But this gives them perhaps their most tangible and recent cudgel to go back and try to compare and contrast based on what we saw from the former president and now what we're seeing with the current one.
Yeah, really important points. Ali and Mike, stand by. Ken, let me turn to you on this. You've obviously been working overnight trying to get the latest information. What is the scope of the DOJ investigation? And you heard Ali talk about the fact there are some key differences here.
Oh, there absolutely are. And in fact, I don't think we should call it an investigation. They're calling it a review. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, has asked the U.S. Attorney in Chicago, who's one of two Trump holdovers appointed by President Trump in the country. He specifically sought out a Trump holdover to conduct a review to determine whether there even should be a criminal investigation. And if there is, presumably he would then ask for a special counsel to be appointed. But there's a real question here as to whether there is any criminal conduct. And in fact, it stands to reason that these kind of inadvertent disclosures happen all the time. And the procedure is, as the Biden team followed, you find the classified documents, you bring them back you give them over to where they should be, in this case, the National Archives. But that doesn't answer the question, though, of where was the breakdown here? How did those documents get there and for what purpose?
And could there be more documents? Those are among the questions that we are asking. Do you have any sense, Ken, of how long this potential DOJ review could last?
It shouldn't last more than a couple of months. They need to interview some of the key people involved, and they should quickly have a sense of exactly what happened here and who was involved.
You and I spend a lot of time talking about the status of these reviews, these investigations, and one of the big questions looming over all of this is, what is Attorney General Merrick Garland going to do as it relates to former President Trump?
Yeah.
Is he going to indict him for his alleged mishandling of classified material? Does this in any way impact that process? I mean, how does it kind of fit into the broader puzzle pieces?
So in an antiseptic world, it shouldn't. As a matter of law, it shouldn't. But the Justice Department lives in the real world and the world of public opinion, and they draw juries from the public who is now seeing that this is that not only did President Trump have documents he shouldn't have had, but Joe Biden did as well. And so it has to impact, particularly if they only have a documents mishandling case against President Trump. If they have an obstruction of justice case, that's another matter. It brings it to a different level. But there's been a longstanding debate. Are we really going to bring a documents mishandling charge against a former president who once had access to classified documents and then didn't anymore, even though he resisted bringing them back? This really complicates that question.
And in the case of President Biden, it is notable that Merrick Garland appointed a U.S. Attorney, Trump appointee in Chicago to oversee this review. Right. Why is that so significant? Ken, help us to understand that part of it.
We're told that Garland did that intentionally to show the public, in the event that this was disclosed, and obviously it was, that they were acting independently. Just as the U.S. Attorney in Delaware is investigating the Hunter Biden matter, and he also is a Trump-appointed holdover. And those are the only two in the country. So Merrick Garland found the other Trump-appointed holdover, and he's giving them this case to show people that, look, this isn't about politics. This is about the law and the facts.
All right. Ken Delanian, busy several hours for you, for
too,
all
Kristen.
of us here. Yes, thank you so much for bringing your insights to us. We really appreciate it. And Ali and Mike before that. Coming up, they've got the gavel. Now Republicans will try to govern. We'll talk to a House Republican about their plans and priorities next. Plus, a bipartisan delegation of senators is visiting the Arizona-Mexico border after officials there declared an emergency over the ongoing humanitarian crisis. We will have the very latest. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. After a bitter battle to name a speaker, House Republicans are trying to kick their agenda into gear, not just with investigations into the Biden White House. On a purely party line vote, the House voted last night to slash IRS funding intended to help the agency find and pursue tax cheats. Despite vows about not bringing bills to the floor that would raise the deficit, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says the legislation would cost taxpayers more than $100 billion over the next decade. Now, of course, the measure is expected to go nowhere in the Democratic-led Senate. Still, Republicans on the campaign trail made this a centerpiece of their messaging. House Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik said this morning that more campaign priorities will soon make their way to the floor, in addition to oversight of the Biden administration. Take a listen.
House Republicans are hitting the ground running, and we are laser focused on passing our Commitment to America agenda and much needed critical oversight of the Biden administration.
Joining me now is New York Republican Congressman Anthony D'Esposito. He is a freshman member of Congress and spoke at that press conference this morning. Congressman, good afternoon, rather. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Good afternoon or good evening.
Right, exactly. We're getting close to the evening, right? Well, look, we are going to get to Republican priorities in your agenda in just a second, but I do want to start with this news, those classified documents found at that think tank tied to President Biden. You heard Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer saying he is requesting information, but he does not think that Mr. Biden actually did anything wrong, actually broke the law. Do you agree with that assessment? How do you see this?
I think we're going to have to see as it unfolds. I'm not certain that we have all the facts right now, but I think as it unfolds, we'll get down to it and see what really this is all about.
You know, you have the Biden administration making the argument that this is a very different situation than what we saw with former President Trump, who was asked to turn over documents, locked in a fierce battle over whether he would do so. Do you see this as a different situation?
Well, of course it's different because he said so. That doesn't mean it's reality.
Explain that. It's different because...
Well, I think the president and his administration is saying that it's different because they work on a different set of rules than everybody else. I think what we need to do is we need to see what happens in the days ahead and get all the facts, and then we can make decisions based on those facts.
Okay, so sounds like you're saying you are not ready to weigh in either way on this classified documents matter, but do you think that it is problematic for a current or former president to retain classified documents in their private space?
If there are classified documents that President Biden had now for years, because it's been since he was, I believe they said since he was vice president, then there's definitely an issue.
And same for former President Trump?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to your agenda now. And I want to ask you about this first bill that was passed by the new Republican House. It basically focused on removing funds that were allocated to the IRS, which is something that Republicans ran on in November. You know well that it's dead on arrival in the Senate. And it goes against, I think, some of the other, not goes against, but some of the things that Republicans ran on, combating inflation, border security. Do you think this was the right first move for Republicans?
Well, I think it was a promise that we made along the campaign trail to look out for the working taxpayers, the people specifically of my district. And I think the money that was allocated for the IRS agents would be much better spent funding our Customs and Border Patrol at our borders.
But do you worry, though, that it will essentially embolden tax cheaters? I mean, part of this money was aimed at cracking down on that problem and ultimately saving money in the long run.
I don't think that it's going to embolden tax cheaters. I think what this was sending people out there, targeting working people, and we need to focus on allocating this funding in places that we actually need it. I visited the southern border. I spoke to Customs and Border Patrol agents. There are agencies throughout this nation that need that money way more than the IRS does.
Well, but as you well know, your home county has seen some high-profile tax evasion cases in the last decade, including from some local politicians. what do you say to Long Island taxpayers who want to see resources that are focused on cracking down on this issue of tax cheats?
I am confident that the IRS will continue their work with or without the 87,000 additional IRS workers.
And how do you respond to the CBO who says that ultimately this is going to add to the deficit when, again, one of the key promises by Republicans is deficit control, bringing the deficit down and into a place that's more sustainable?
I think that it's a clear talking point for them. We've done the research here. We understand the decisions that we made. And like I said, along the campaign trail, this is one of the things that we focused on across the nation. It was something that Republicans ran on. It was what voters talked about. It was something that they were concerned about. And we made promises. We kept those promises, and we delivered today, or yesterday, I should say.
Okay. Let me ask you about one of your colleagues, Congressman George Santos, obviously,
Sure.
who's been in the headlines lately. He was served with an ethics complaint. Do you think that the ethics committee should be involved? Do you think that was the right step?
Well, I think that there's going to be, or are, numerous investigations into the actions of Congressman George Santos. As I stated a couple weeks ago, and I've stated, over the last few days since being sworn in at, I think, 2 a.m. on Friday evening, George Santos violated the trust of not only the voters, but he's violated the trust of the people who serve here in Congress. I think the ethics investigation, amongst many others, are going to unravel over the next weeks and months, and we will see how they pan out.
So very quickly, you do support the ethics investigation, just to be very clear. Okay. Okay. Let me ask you about Kevin McCarthy. As you know, he's expected to bar some House Democrats from serving on key committees. Do you support that move, or do you worry that it smacks of revenge?
I don't think it's revenge. I think that some of these individuals would have a hard time getting top secret security clearance or security clearance in a private sector job, let alone being a member of Congress.
Okay, let me ask you about Speaker McCarthy. Obviously, bruising battle to get the gavel. He has said it's not going to weaken his speakership. Do you think that that's accurate, or do you think that he has been weakened by this process?
I don't think he's been weakened at all. I think that, if anything, it showed his strength. It showed his resilience. It showed that he kept his eye on what he thought was right, and that was gaining the gavel and becoming Speaker of the House. And at the end of the day, we had a unified Republican front. And we also have to remember that right after the election, we got together in a caucus, and over 90% of the members of the Republican caucus chose Kevin McCarthy as our Speaker of the House. And it took us a few days, and I have to say, as a freshman, it gave us the opportunity to really meet our colleagues and to understand what their beliefs were and what was important to them. So if anything, I believe that it was a learning experience. I think Kevin McCarthy is going to be a tremendous leader, a great speaker, and he's got great days ahead.
All right, Congressman Anthony D'Esposito, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And turning now to developments out of New York, former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg has been sentenced to 5 months in jail and 5 years probation for his role in the company's 15-year tax fraud scheme. Weisselberg is now heading to New York's Rikers Island, where he will likely serve about 100 days behind bars after taking into account time off for good behavior. The former CFO pled guilty to multiple tax fraud charges and was a star witness in the Manhattan DA's case against the Trump Organization. Just last month, a jury convicted the Trump Organization on 17 counts of conspiracy and tax fraud. The company now faces up to $1.6 million in fines. Up next, document drama and congressional committee chaos. Plus, Democrat Katie Porter announces she's running for Senate in California in a seat that current Senator Dianne Feinstein has not said she plans to give up yet. So what's this timing about? You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're looking live at the House of Representatives, where members have begun votes on a couple of select committees that are very dear to the new Republican majority. One would establish a committee on competition between the U.S. and China, and the other would create a judiciary subcommittee on what Republicans are calling the weaponization of the federal government. Joining me now to discuss all of this is our panel, USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page, Democratic pollster and NBC News political analyst Cornell Belcher, and former Illinois Republican Congressman Rodney Davis. Thanks to all of you for being here. We certainly do have a lot to chew on today. Susan, let me start with you and this discovery, revelation, if you will, that President Biden had classified documents, about a dozen, in his think tank soon after he left the Obama administration as vice president. How big of a political problem is this for him?
Big. It's a big problem. I mean, you can argue that there are a lot of differences, as there are between President Biden and Donald Trump's treatment of classified documents. But if you took it seriously with Donald Trump, you have to take it seriously with Joe Biden. We need to know more about why these documents are there, what documents are there, what they are, were they kept securely in what is now being called a locked closet. So even if this turns out to be less serious than the situation that Donald Trump faces, it is one that has to be taken seriously and will distract and consume at least some attention at the White House.
Cornell, it strikes me that one of the biggest problems from an optics perspective is that we learned about this from a breaking news report, not from the Biden White House. They learned about it before the midterm elections, and yet the public is just finding out about it now. The White House says we can't disclose all of that right now because this is so sensitive. But is that the crux of the concern here?
Well, no, I don't know. Look, there's a lot still to come out about this, right? But I will agree with Susan, because this brilliant reporter here is the truth of the matter is politically.
No debate about that.
No debate about that.
Everyone here agrees with that.
But the truth of the matter is it does muddy the water politically. And we can talk about the substance differences between these documents and what Trump did and the obstruction and them turning these over. I want to be very transparent about it. But in politics, none of it matters. Mm-hmm. Politics right now, the waters have been muddied. And I think the impact of this as an issue politically has been depowered for Democrats.
Congressman Davis, what do you make of this? This is, by all accounts, a political gift to Republicans who are already getting ready to investigate the Biden administration for a range of issues.
They certainly are. I mean, the oversight agenda of what we used to know in a Republican majority is going to be much different. Remember, we have Republicans now that believe in the heavy hand of government, like many Democrats and progressives have for decades. But I could not agree with Susan more. This is a big deal. And Merrick Garland and the Justice Department have to understand, half the country right now, there are a lot of Republicans who are the major voters in many of my former colleagues' very strong Republican districts to think there's a two-tier system of justice.
Well, and we have heard a number of Republicans on the Hill make that very point. I wonder, though, Congressman, do you have any concerns about overreach? Because I have spoken to a lot of rank-and-file Republican members who say, look, yes, we want to launch investigations, but we have to get stuff done while we're here.
Well, I don't know a lot of people who expected in a divided government to get a lot of new issues taken care of. I'm more concerned about them getting the basics done, like the appropriations process, the debt ceiling, et cetera. But in the end, more transparency in government, having open hearings to discuss the issues that concern voters, I don't see why that's a problem.
I think it is a problem, though, when you look at the weaponizing of the federal government, and you look at them trying to bring back what's the Holloman Act, and so that you can actually punish people in the federal government. I think there is some danger here. And look, I think not only Democrats, but some even Republicans have some issues and some concerns about how much McCarthy gave away in order to become Speaker. I mean, how much does the institution suffer, not even being partisan, but how much does the institution suffer because of what he gave away to be Speaker? I think that's fair.
Well, Cornell, I will tell you, as somebody who served in the majority and in the minority, the rules package that was approved yesterday with only one Republican dissenting vote really is not much different than what we operated under the last time we were in the majority.
Susan, all of this is unfolding. Meanwhile, while President Biden is in Mexico, he's holding high-level talks about the crisis at the border, one of the biggest issues facing his presidency, overshadowing a potential run for office in 2024. Do you think that, we're going to listen to what he has to say in this press conference, does he need to have something very clear very direct to say on this issue today, if he is asked about it.
On the documents issue?
On the documents issue.
He's going to be asked about it. I would expect that to be the first question. And he needs to have something clear to say, and he needs to say, I'm going to cooperate. If he can explain why these documents are there, he needs to do that. I suspect he'll say he doesn't know why they're there. He needs to draw some distinctions between him and President Trump. But as Cornell said, and as a congressman said as well, for a lot of Americans, it looks the same. It looks like both sides are doing the same thing. So why are we treating Biden with any more deference than we treated Trump?
And let's just talk very briefly about the border. Cornell, let me get your take on the fact that President Biden did go to the border, didn't meet with migrants, but he made that critical trip that he's under an immense amount of pressure to make. What do you make of the plan that he has rolled out? What do you make of his handling of it as he considers a potential run for re-election?
Well, policy aside, let's talk about the politics of it, right? Because from a policy standpoint, nothing's going to get done on the border. Look, I was around for the Gang of Eight back in 2013 when
I was too.
When my guy Barack Obama thought he had a deal,
right?
And you were and Boehner sort of pulled back on it. And if you look at the advertising we just saw from the last midterm election. Tens of millions of dollars gone in advertising, scaring Americans to death about an invasion on the border. This has become now a political issue. It's a political issue that, quite frankly, I don't think Republicans are going to give up on. Meet the Press you all did on data download. You talked about this. Quite frankly, we need immigration into this country. We're not going to get immigration to this country like Canada is doing because of the politics.
Congressman, respond to that, because the point is nothing really is going to get done significantly until there is comprehensive immigration reform, right? And it's just both sides cannot come together on this.
This is the one issue that both sides have hijacked for their own political purposes. Remember,
no one's seriously negotiating, you're saying.
When the last serious negotiation was led by my colleagues Jeff Denham and Carlos Curbelo when we put together Goodlat 1 and Goodlat 2. If every Republican would have supported those measures, they would have gotten the wall built, we would have fixed our internal immigration problems, and we would have provided a path to DACA and Dreamers. But in the end, that issue is not going to be solved. Barack Obama had almost a veto-proof majority and had a majority in the Senate that he could have got it done. He chose not to because Cornell had polling that said it would be a good idea.
Cornell, very quickly respond, and then we got to get to Katie Porter.
The congressman knows very well that we did when the Gang of Eight moved it in the Senate, it did pass the Senate, bipartisanship, and you know very well that Boehner wanted to do it. And the caucus would not allow him to do it.
All right, we could have a whole panel. Susan, let me get your reaction to the fact that Democratic Congresswoman Katie Porter announced she's running for Senate next year. 89-year-old Senator Dianne Feinstein hasn't announced that she's not running yet, hasn't announced that she's stepping down. And here California is dealing with a crisis. Let me just read Feinstein's statement because it's fascinating. She says, everyone, of course, welcome to throw their hat in the ring, and I will make an announcement concerning my plans for 2024 at the appropriate time. Right now, I'm focused on ensuring California has all the resources it needs to cope with the devastating storms slamming the state and leaving more than a dozen dead. And all of her, by the way, potential challengers are saying the same thing. We're focused on the storm. What's with this timing?
Well, the timing is to be the first out of the gate because she will not be the last out of the gate. Dianne Feinstein does not have the option of running again. There are a slew of Democrats, powerful Democrats, accomplished politicians who are going to run for that seat. Katie's out there first. Katie Porter's out there first. It is, I think, slightly dangerous to be doing this at a time when Californians are dealing with such a climate crisis.
All right. Well, fascinating all around. Thank you all. Wish we had more time, but that's all the time we have for now. Susan Cornell and former Congressman Rodney Davis. Great conversation. Coming up next, live reporting from exactly what we're talking about here, the California coast amid evacuations and dangerous flood warnings as another fatal storm wallops the state. But first, as President Biden visits Mexico for the North American Leaders Summit, we do want to take a look back at another set of trilateral talks for today's Meet the Press Minute. Here's a moment from Chuck's June 2018 interview with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as the U.S. and Canada were locked in tense negotiations over the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Let me go to NAFTA. Do you understand what the United States wants in this renegotiation?
I think they want a better deal on their auto sector from Mexico, and I think they want more access on certain agricultural products like dairy to Canada.
Are you willing to give them that?
We were moving towards flexibility in those areas that I thought was very, very promising. But the United States want a sunset clause in NAFTA, right, which makes no sense. You don't sign a trade deal that automatically expires every 5 years.
That's a non-starter for you.
It's a non-starter. Well,
you won't be at the table if that's on the table?
No. You can think about investment. What company is going to want to invest in Canada if 5 years later there might not be a trade deal with the United States? And that, quite frankly, is probably part of the whole point of the United States, to say, well, no, we don't want anyone investing in our NAFTA partners. We want people investing in us. But that's not the way trade works.
Welcome back. Tens of millions of Californians are under flood alerts, and nearly 180,000 are without power as an onslaught of severe weather continues to batter the state. The heavy rainfall brought severe flooding and dangerous mudslides. This was the scene in Montecito, California, where an evacuation order remains in place for the entire town. In suburban Los Angeles, dramatic video shows rescue crews pulling 2 people from a car swallowed by a sinkhole. They were taken to the hospital with minor injuries. In the last 10 days, at least 15 people have died from these series of storms. That's according to the governor's office. And near San Miguel, search efforts are back underway for a missing 5-year-old who was swept away by the floodwaters. Dangerous conditions forced first responders to call off the search yesterday. Now, rain is expected to let up across most of the state tonight, but a new storm system will move into the Northern California area tomorrow. Joining me now is NBC's Marissa Parra from Aptos, California in Santa Cruz County. Thank you so much, Marissa, for joining us this afternoon. What is the very latest? What are you seeing there? Has the flooding begun to recede?
Yeah, and you can see that we're getting a break in the clouds. But as you mentioned, especially looking at that forecast, I mean, there is more rain on the way in California before it's even had a chance to recede in some parts. We're south of Santa Cruz, but it has gone down from when we were first here. Here's one piece of good news for you. This market, they live upstairs. They were not able to come downstairs. And you guys were finally able to make it down. How are you feeling right now? How do you feel?
Yeah, we feel good.
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot of smiles from people around here as they're finally able to go and see the light of day. But the problem is, Kristen, is that the problem is far from over. If you pan over here, you'll see piles of sand and mud as people are trying to still clean up from just the last 10 days. But it just feels like California can't catch a break. Every time they try to go through the process of stacking up the trees over there, they get slammed by another storm system, which we know isn't yet over, Kristen.
Yeah, Marissa, how much concern is there about this storm coming tomorrow, that it could potentially bring more flooding, more devastation to the region?
There is a lot of concern about that, and there's good reason for that, because after the last bomb cyclone, they were still trying to recover from that. We saw just how vulnerable it made the area here. And one of the big concerns isn't just the flooding, but the landslides, the mudslides. And a big part of the reason why we're seeing a lot of that around here is because all those wildfires made the land very vulnerable to that. So what happens is when you have all of this rain coming down, the soil simply just cannot handle it. So it just slides onto anything in its path, whether it be trees, cars. We've even seen it shut down highways and roads as a result of that. So there is concern, especially because it's hitting different parts of the state at different times. So we know the big concern tomorrow when it comes to flooding specifically is going to be the northern part of the state as the rest of the state tries to recover together.
All right, Marissa Parra, great reporting. Please do stay safe there. Appreciate it. Joining me now is the Santa Cruz County Supervisor, Zach Friend. Zach, it is so good to see you, and we should let our audience know you and I have worked together. We go way back. When I was a local reporter in Philadelphia, you worked for then Senator Obama for his campaign in Pennsylvania. It is good to see you, but I wish it were under different circumstances. I am so sorry for everything that you all are going through.
Thank you, Christian. We really do appreciate the fact that you're willing to elevate our community's story right now. People are really, really suffering here. Businesses, homeowners. It's been quite a challenge for the last 10 days.
I know that it has been, and I want you to just map out that picture for people. What is the very latest? What are you seeing? And what are the resources that you need most right now?
Well, look, we've received over 2 feet of rain at the coast here in just the last 10 days. We have 30,000 people that are currently evacuated. Those are disproportionately from low-income communities, even monolingual speakers. So we've had a lot of challenges from both flooding as well as outreach. And as your reporter just noted, it just won't stop. We have nothing really in the future that really gives us any particular hope that this kind of flooding and these challenges won't stop. In fact, yesterday, every road out of the community was blocked. Every highway was blocked. We couldn't get deliveries. We couldn't get cars in and out. And this is just what we're trying to face right now and get through. And, you know, just 2 months ago, we were in an extreme drought. Now we're in an extreme flood situation. And it's been just quite a challenge.
I'm sure that it has been. And the pictures have just been devastating. You, of course, are going to be joined by Governor Newsom shortly, who's going to survey some of the damage. What is your message going to be to him? And do you feel as though you are getting the resources that you need from the state and federal governments?
Yeah, the state and the federal government have been great. President Biden signed the declaration almost immediately. The fact that Governor Newsom's on the ground today, and I'll be meeting with him in about 15 minutes, shows the governor's commitment to this area. But really what it is to be an open-ended amount of support. I mean, we're going to need both financial resources. Our businesses are going to need loans. So many mom and pop businesses were destroyed due to the wave action of about a week ago. So many homes have been destroyed, and a lot of people are also out of work. So this is going to be a long-term rebuild, and that's really what my message to the governor is going to be, is stick with us well past when the storms pass.
And I guess, what is your message to residents right now? I mean, what are your biggest concerns about the dangers for them beyond the flooding right now?
Well, look, we still have 30,000 people that are evacuated from their homes. We have a river that hasn't crested yet in the southern portion of our county called the Pajaro River. It has the lowest level of flood protection of any federally funded project in the state, and it protects 2 federally disadvantaged communities. I mean, this is really playing out across the United States in Louisiana, Iowa, Kentucky, and here. Low-income communities really have been underinvested in our infrastructure funding, and these levee systems are pretty antiquated. We've been doing everything we can with bilingual. I've gone door to door to try and do everything we can to let people know that this is very serious. This is once in a generation flooding. People's lives matter too much, their homes matter too much, and their community matters too much for them not to heed these warnings that we're providing.
And I know this might be difficult to answer, but do you have a sense of when those people who've been evacuated might be able to get back into their homes, when power will be restored to those who've lost it?
Yeah, I mean, because of some of the gas-related issues that we had, in fact, we even had one home that caught on fire due to a severed gas line. Some have not been able to have power restored for safety reasons, and our work crews, including road crews, due to the number of road failures, need the lines to be de-energized in order for them to be able to work. So the answer is that it depends. It depends upon how rural they are. It depends upon how much underwater they still currently are. I will say that our local electric company, Pacific Gas and Electric, has mobilized a lot of mutual aid from across the state. They're doing everything they can to bring power and gas back to people. But a lot of this district, a lot of this county is still without power. So they don't even have access to necessarily to information, which is what has made it also an additional challenge for us.
And I believe that at last count, Santa Cruz has 1 recorded death. Is that number still accurate? And are you bracing for that number to rise?
That number is accurate. We have had really good compliance when we've gone door to door and set out evacuation notices. Our biggest concern, though, is this Pajaro River, which straddles Santa Cruz County and Monterey County. I mean, we've already got 30,000 people out, but not everybody left. And if it does breach or it does break, we have a history there where people have died as a result of flooding associated with that river. That's what we're watching, and it's currently about 1/2 foot below flood stage.
Okay, Supervisor Zach Friend, thank you so much. We are going to keep you and your community in our thoughts. Really appreciate your joining us.
Thank you, Kristen.
Coming up next, we are live in Mexico City, where the president is set to speak in just a few moments after meeting with our key North American allies. We'll tell you what's at stake. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We expect President Biden to speak coming up shortly at the North American Leaders Summit, affectionately known as the Three Amigos Summit. He will be appearing alongside his counterparts from Mexico and Canada. The official summit meeting with Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau finished just moments ago. Now, the migrant crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border took center stage on this trip. The summit coming just a week after the announcement of new U.S. border policies that rely heavily on Mexico's cooperation, and only a few days after President Biden made his first trip to the southern border. President Biden also held bilateral meetings with both leaders, appearing with President López Obrador last night and Prime Minister Trudeau earlier today. On double duty for us this hour, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli is in Mexico City as we wait for the leaders to speak. Mike, I think they're running just a few minutes late, but tell us what's at stake with this summit. Obviously, we know that the border was front and center, but they were talking about a number of other critical issues, right?
Yeah, that's right, Kristen. You've been through this before. You know things always tend to be just a little bit behind schedule, as is the case now. But what I think you can look at this press conference coming up here is the end of really a 6-day period of sustained focus by the administration on this issue of migration of the likes we haven't seen in the 23 months of this presidency so far. And so it's notable the ways in which President Biden has tried to use this summit as sort of the set piece around which to finally really engage in a significant way on what has been a real political liability for this White House. And as part of the announcements coming out of this summit, the three leaders are committing to deepen really their partnership in trying to communicate more, opening what they're calling a virtual portal for those who might want to seek asylum in not just the United States, but also Canada or Mexico, those fleeing these countries where we're seeing the biggest escapes right now from Nicaragua, Haiti, Cuba, as well as Venezuela. And this is all aimed at discouraging them from making that treacherous journey here, only to potentially be turned away at the border. So in combination with those new ramped up enforcement measures the president announced, that's part of what the focus is going to be here. What we're also going to hear is some of the other areas that brought these leaders to the table, some of them really thorny ones, like those around trade. Mexico, for instance, has threatened to boycott the import of genetically modified corn from the United States. That's part of a trade dispute that is underway in the fallout from the USMCA. Remember that trade agreement that President Trump brought into force of these three leaders. And then lastly, the president trying to put a significant focus on fentanyl. Last night, he called this the plague of fentanyl in this country, an issue Republicans in particular have been focused on. He wants greater cooperation and greater enforcement, frankly, from the Mexican government on that flow of illegal drugs coming from south of the border that he says has been responsible for at least 100,000 deaths here in America and counting. So I think it'll be interesting to hear, of course, all the leaders weigh in on these and other issues. But, of course, we're also going to be listening closely for whether President Biden engages on that issue we began the show with, the discovery of classified documents at his private office. I know our colleague Monica Alba, other reporters are warming up their voices to shout these very important questions that we have of the president at this moment, Kristen.
Yeah, we know Monica is getting ready very quickly, less than 30 seconds. Mike, we also understand Ukraine was in focus as well.
Yeah, that's right. The leaders, really, President Biden has used any gathering here of world leaders to try and deepen cooperation on Ukraine as well. He's been trying to bring other leaders to the table in the way that the United States has. And so expect to hear more from the president about what the leaders discussed on that as well.
Okay, Mike Memoli, extraordinary reporting as always. And throughout this hour, we really appreciate it. And as we wait for President Biden to speak, we do want to turn back to the border. What I was just talking to Mike Memoli about is a bipartisan group of senators have gathered at the border for the second day. This time, the group led by Arizona Independent Kyrsten Sinema and Texas Republican John Cornyn is in Yuma, near Arizona's border with Mexico. They are slated to receive a briefing from the border enforcement officers and to tour border facilities. The senators visited El Paso yesterday as that city continues to deal with a critical humanitarian crisis. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez has more from Yuma, Arizona.
Kristen, as President Biden meets with the leaders of Mexico and Canada at that North American Leaders Summit, here on the ground at the U.S. southern border, a bipartisan group of senators will be visiting here amid renewed calls for immigration reform in Congress. Of course, there are many who here at the border that are skeptical that much will get done, considering that immigration reform has evaded lawmakers for such a long time. But this bipartisan group of senators think that now is the time. Still, Kristen, we've been speaking with migrant advocates here who are continuing to see a large number of migrants come here to the border. We were here in Yuma several months ago when the numbers were even higher, and local officials declared a state of emergency and say that there was a more than 2,600% increase in unauthorized migrant crossings here in this part of the border over the past year. Now, just this morning, Kristen, we saw several groups of migrants, including some from Russia and also a family from Colombia, a young woman and her baby boy, just 9 months old, here at the border, spending many hours in cold temperatures waiting to be processed by the Border Patrol. Now, we spoke with those migrant advocates who say that recent policies from the Biden administration that made it easier for migrants from some countries, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, to stay in this country if they apply for asylum through the proper channels. They say that that policy excludes migrants from other countries and could potentially prove dangerous because those migrants from other countries may now be disencouraged to turn themselves into the Border Patrol and may try to circumvent the system and enter the U.S. through more dangerous conditions. And they're disappointed in the Biden administration. So this ongoing humanitarian crisis, Kristen, which you just witnessed in El Paso earlier this week, continues to play out across the southern border as this bipartisan group of senators visits Yuma, Arizona today amid those renewed calls for immigration reform. Kristen?
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you so much for your incredible reporting. I was with Gabe in El Paso and saw the humanitarian crisis, people lining the streets, really tragic. Chuck's back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. Hallie Jackson picks up our coverage right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.